Welcome to the Human AI Alliance. I'm your host, Lee Bristow. We invite guests onto the show who can provide detailed, high-resolution answers to questions we have about the Human AI Alliance. In this episode, we tackle one of the biggest questions in AI, the EU AI Act, and is it a burden or opportunity? So today we welcome Marita Kenrick, co-founder of Alto Health. Marita is at the forefront of health technology and innovation, building an AI-powered platform to automate clinical operations and referral management. So thank you for joining the Human AI Alliance show. Welcome, Marita. How are you doing?
Fabulous. How about you?
I love that enthusiasm. Fabulous. So let's get started. Let's start with the beginning. How did your career journey go from deep research into AI tech startup world? And most importantly, are you enjoying it?
Enjoying it. Most days, I think it's ups and downs like everything. I think the strand that pulls everything together from my early career to now is, having a deep interest in understanding problems from a behavioral perspective and from a systems perspective. And so that went from research and how you might refine health systems or human behaviors, interactions with a health system, to get a better outcome. And I think that's the same thing with having a startup. Sort of encountered a problem, then tinkered around and thought about what was causing that problem, thought about it from a few different perspectives, and here I am.
I mean, I was having a look at your career path. I mean, it took you from basically administration into psychology, which we haven't kind of touched on. And I think that also kind of lends into some of that aspects around how patients are potentially affected through the concept of basically waiting on a prognosis and that patient referral process and just living through that experience. I think that kind of ties back to it, right?
Yeah, I think psychology is a really excellent foundation to both, understanding human behavior and using research to sort of uncover different solutions to problems that you're faced with. And it might be a psychosocial problem, it might be an efficiency problem, but it sort of introduced me to that sort of world of research and hypothesis testing and, I think safety in design, because, at that outset, you're dealing with, in a clinical perspective, emotional and psychosocial well-being. And so that sort of was the introduction. I was really interested. I started off in admin and marketing and was really much more interested in how you influence behavior, and then segued into health, because how do you influence health behavior to enhance system efficiency? So that whether that's sort of adopting a new healthy behavior like physical activity, stopping one like drinking, which none of us are great at, or adopting a behavior like vaccination, or taking your kid, making sure your kids don't go to school when they've got a cough. So they're all sort of, they all seem like they're disparate things, but they're actually just, you have a challenge and then you're looking for a solution to that challenge that makes the experience or the environment better for everyone. And I think that is that common thread, and you do it in a way that is, documented, evidence-based, and with the good of the human at the center.
Yeah, I love that piece there with the human at the center, right? And I think that's probably a really good kind of segue into why you started up Alto Health, because I mean, my understanding is that you're basically tackling one of the biggest challenges, which is administrative waste of time, effort, money, in the healthcare system. And you're doing that with AI fundamentally. And yeah, so two-part question is sort of, how do you think AI is actually going to help solve that problem? And probably more importantly, how big is that particular problem?
Yeah. So, I mean, the problem that we solve is referral and previsit processing for specialist care. And so most people would understand that from, their personal experience, where they might get a referral from a GP, and then that goes to a specialist clinic. And that might be that was emailed by the GP, or they post it themselves, or then they have to, call the secretary and send them. But essentially, once that hits the clinic, that's the process we automate. And I'm sure it won't surprise anyone that's had any interface with it, but it might surprise, just normal people. But it's all manual. It's completely manual. People are getting these referrals in by paper, and humans have to process and make every manual decision on that. And that's from, should we accept this patient into this clinic? Are they the right patient? Is there any missing data? How urgent is it? And so I guess the reason that we use AI to solve this problem is because of those two parts of the problem. So you have both the way the data comes in as part of the problem, which is sort of a typical AI problem, but we also then there's decision making that needs to be made on that data, and that's typically made it's made by humans, and it's based on clinical criteria. Can we see this piece of information there? If this sign or symptom is there, then they are routine or they are urgent. So, the reason that we use the AI is it's the only way that we can solve that problem. So we started that with that problem, and it was kind of agnostic to how you solve it. And in fact, I wanted to solve it because of a patient experience, but then figured out, actually, you need to solve it for the clinician and the clinic, because they're the ones that are inundated with this paper and this documentation, and are really struggling to process it.
That's actually really interesting. Yeah, I was like, hang on a second. Oh, wait, there is another party in this particular problem. Because I was always thinking from a patient perspective, right? I'm thinking, you went to a GP, the GP has told you, oh my God, there's something scary, but I don't know, we need to refer you. And then you wait in a black box for 2 weeks while they figure out this whole referral process, sometimes even much longer than that. And I'm thinking probably a good solution would be is turning those weeks and months into a couple days in terms of your solution, in terms of your platform, right? That would be a great outcome for the patient. But it's almost like I mean, no disrespect, but it's almost like the clinic doesn't actually really care too much about it, because they're inundated in the paperwork. They're doing the best they can, and they're thinking, we're crushing this. But there is two parts to that. So you almost had to not solve it necessarily for the patient, because in that instance, the patient wasn't the actual patient. The patient was the clinic that was suffering from an overburdenness.
Yeah. And I think, I think the clinics do worry about it, because not only are they managing a huge volume of staff for each consultant doctor, like you can have 5 secretaries managing one consultant doctor, and that's a lot to juggle. But doctors do worry about delays, because they know that any delay in patient care can impact outcome. And so not only do they want to speed up processing, if it's a private hospital, because of throughput, they want to speed it up because of patient experience, but because of clinical outcomes, because the faster you see someone, the better their outcomes. So I think previously there wasn't a really good way to do that and to support them. Like the technology just wasn't there in able to extract the data and then to overlay that sort of reasoning. So what we have at the moment is we have lots of document holding systems, like electronic health records or emails that will shuffle the documents around, but they don't do anything to say this document that's hit your inbox actually is a super urgent referral and needs someone to look at it straight away. What will happen is the secretary might run through the list and just see them as they're coming in. And that's no fault of theirs. That's just, that's just an outcome of the system that was developed to respond, to the need to refer and have this sort of clinical handover process. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think that that analogy of the email sitting in the inbox, waiting in anticipation for somebody to do something, and that's kind of where the AI can step in and actually do an action, because that's the piece of the AI. Yeah. It's not just a passive element. It can actually create an action on the other side of that. And that's really the value that you're looking to create within that, within that journey, right?
Yeah. So, it can automate some of those actions, like, just extraction and processing and putting them into an inbox. It can flag referrals that are higher priority or emergency. It can flag ones that don't actually have enough information there for a clinician to make a safe decision and refer that and send that back to the referrer. I think you'd be very surprised at the huge volume of referrals that come in that don't have the information needed for a consultant to make a safe decision. It can be up to 80% of them. And so they need to be returned really quickly so that the information can be filled in so the patient isn't suffering that. So that's sort of a system problem that the patient then, suffers from. So look, there is a lot going on in the processing of that. Sometimes clinics get referrals that are sent to them and it's not appropriate for them. They mightn't deal with that specific issue and they need to forward it to a different clinic or send it back to the referrer and say, you need to send it here. So those things can be shortcutted. Shortcutted,
yeah.
Is that even a word?
I think so. Shortcut.
Well, I'm using it today.
Could be shortcut. Yeah. We'll add it. I mean, you've essentially highlighted two use cases there. One in terms of not actually having the complete picture in order to be able to make a decision on whether the referral should be with that clinic, or the other one where it clearly shouldn't, and just moving it along a lot quicker. And AI can support in those decision-making processes pretty quickly. I think that kind of brings me to kind of the next point, is that, if you've got an AI that's sitting there, just having a human in the loop, being able to flag to see what's happening, how do you envision that? So if the AI is doing some of the heavy lifting in terms of the analysis, figuring out, you got multiple agents looking at this. So an agent that might look at email, an agent that's looking at text, an agent that's looking at X, Y, and Z. Then you've got a scoring mechanism. But what does the human interface look like? And then what do you think you could accelerate? So, I was at the AI Awards this morning, and I know it's a different industry, but that was talking about the contact center industry. And they were looking at the stat was 23 hours for a case to be solved versus 90 seconds. That was the ROI. So, is that the kind of ROI that you're thinking could be achieved within that space? And, maybe I'm just kind of overlaying and I'm being too broad, but maybe cut me down to size or agree or.
I think what we're looking at is sort of a 75% reduction in admin and then an 85% faster referral to scheduling process. So I wouldn't go so far as saying, 90 seconds, because actually these are administrative decisions, but they border on clinical decisions. So, we do have a human in the loop at every stage. We have spent a long time thinking about, okay, how do we embed this in the existing workflow? Because the system is so complex that change isn't going to be, change is a tricky thing in a clinical environment because everyone's risk adverse. And so what we needed to do is implement that within the system that they're in and in a way that's recognizable and supports them rather than just go straight for automation. So yes, it has that level of impact, but it has the human in the loop at every stage because that's sort of safety and because that's transparency and need to provide fully reasoned decisions and then have someone check them is critical. I think I've said this to you before, but the way I think about it is, we have to think about this system as something that we want, like our parents, our partner, our kids to use, because that's essentially who it could be. So it's all well and good for me to say, we have this system and we can reduce admin by 75%, but we have this system that can do that, but that is safe, transparent, and well governed so that I feel safe for my parents or my kids to use it and other people can as well.
Yeah, I really like that. I truly do. I think when it comes to these kinds of solutions, there are a lot of kind of, let's say, regulatory red tape that has to go along with these kinds of platforms. So, for example, the EU AI Act, GDPR, medical device regulations. How does a startup in Ireland that is tackling such a big issue in Ireland kind of overcome not only the technology problem, but also the regulatory problem, the kind of the big business issues that you guys are having to face?
Look, I wish I had the answer to that question. I'm still struggling with that every day. I think there are probably a number of answers to that. I think it's really hard because you're trying to do everything simultaneously with limited resource, so in the most efficient way possible. But I think also it comes back to the different lenses to look on safety and compliance with. So you have that human lens, and then you have the business lens, and they're both intertwined because the reason why you're doing it from a business perspective is trust and safety from users, but actually adoption. Clinicians aren't going to adopt a product that doesn't use the same regulatory standards that they're used to working with. The standards that a medical device in the hospital has is CE marked. They know that they can use that as a shortcut for safety. And then, the other business perspective is without compliance, you can't scale. You're going to be blocked from market entry, you're going to be blocked from procurement, so in a way it's super challenging to do it. And there's been lots of times where we've been pulling our hair out, how come we can't, there's a time investment, there's a financial investment, but I think where we're coming to now is, compliance isn't a constraint. It's what makes adoption possible. And now that we have lots of the pillars in place, it becomes a moat as well. Like early on, it was a struggle because not only are you trying to understand the problem, the technology, and the regulation, but you have a myriad of regulations that you're trying to figure out, and they all overlap, and you don't quite know where they overlap, and so you could be duplicating effort. So look, I don't think there's any easy answer. I think there has to be a commitment to seeing it as fundamental to, you know, the humanity of the product as well as the business, you know, the business opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that attitude though, because you know I know you guys have you started on a seed round. I don't know quite how far you guys are into that, but you know, potentially from an investor perspective, you know, they would see the letter CE and they would go, ooh, and then they'll see EU AI Act, high risk potential, da 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 da, and that immediately will kind of go, you know, long sales cycle. This could be a challenge, da 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 da. But if you reframe that as a moat, that actually in an environment where software can be vibe coded in weeks versus months and years previously, that might actually kind of invert from an investor perspective. You know, maybe a year or 18 months ago, it was a different conversation, but, you know, now and looking a year into the future of where you guys will be, that could really be a great selling point for you.
Yeah, and I think it also not only a selling point, but I think it should reassure investors or users, because actually I think the guardrails for products like this are becoming, you know, more explicitly communicated. So, you know, there's an easy way to determine what risk is. So they shouldn't say,
Yeah.
or, oh my God, that's so frightening. They should say, okay, do you have these things in place? Can I see your risk logs? Let's talk about what the risk is. What have you done to mitigate it? Rather than standing there and pretending that there is no risk. Because, you know, we know regardless of what the industry is, there is risk. Things make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. You know, I think it gives, not only does it give us a moat, but it gives us a language and, you know, a system to think about and control risk, which I would never have said 18 months ago.
It's the part of living and learning, right? That's it.
Yeah.
So I know Alto Health has recently been shortlisted for an innovation award. Yeah, maybe if you can give me a little bit of background around that, but I'm assuming it's part of that innovation award is because you guys are actually tackling something that is as complex as you previously articulated. You know, is this something that you feel is you know, like a validation point from an Alto Health perspective, and maybe you can just tell me a little bit about the award.
Yeah, so we have been shortlisted for the Health Innovation Hub AI Award, and that is to pilot within the HSE, and that would be a collaboration between Health Innovation Hub, University of Cork, and the HSE to sort of pilot innovative products that will have impact within the system and on clinical outcomes. So, you know, interesting, one of the criteria for that project is that you already have your regulation in place. So we wouldn't have even been able to apply or be considered if we didn't have our regulation in place. So, you know, it's part of the foundation to the building of our business that now we can have these opportunities because, you know, those pieces are in place. And we are really looking forward to the outcome of that. and I think all of those things are validation. I think, it is difficult. Adoption is difficult in these high risk areas because no one wants to be the first mover. But we've done some really exciting work with Galway University as well on clinical simulations to prove accuracy. So I think there are also, different models of going to market in regulated industries than there would be in sort of your typical startup world.
Yeah. I love the collaboration between yourself and the universities. I think that's really important. And given your background in research and your master's degrees in those areas, I think that really kind of lends itself, and it also lends itself to the credibility if the universities are involved, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a little bit of a segue out of that. So just kind of coming back to your education history. So you've got a health management degree, and you've worked primarily up until now in more government education type institutions from what I could tell. But your platform is targeting more the private sector specialists. That was my understanding. But with this innovation hub, that might change slightly. But is the thought process to almost use that? Is it a deliberate strategy to kind of create a beachhead into an area which might be more open to risk, essentially within the private sector, and then show the use case and then migrate into more of the public? Is that the strategy, or am I kind of stepping too close to your future visions?
I think so. The product is designed to, benefit any referral accessed care. And that happens in both a public and a private setting. And so public settings come with different procurement cycles and sales cycles and different challenges for a startup. So whilst we see huge benefit for, public wait lists, public outpatient clinics, we also have to be really realistic about what sort of sales cycles we can sustain and what sort of tolerance for innovation and risk as well. So we are dual tracking entry into both the UK and Ireland, as well as public and private, in order to do that. We do think that there is a huge benefit in the public system, but there are lots of challenges. In lots of circumstances, they still don't have electronic health records. So, you have nowhere to put a digital, save the outputs from a digital product, or where, what do we interface with? And so there are lots of other challenges, and adoption will be much slower in that public system, but is critically important to drive efficiency in that system, not least because it's funded by our tax dollars, but because we can all avail of that. And, I think it is one of the benefits of the UK and Ireland, and obviously I'm Australian, is that we have that public system. And we also know there are challenges there with the lack of funding, and innovation is one way to make that system more efficient and enable the dollars that are going into it to work harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in terms of the kind of two questions to kind of round out is one, you're launching Alto Health in Ireland and in the UK, as you mentioned. Do you see a kind of a broader view of that? As you mentioned, you hail from Australia. Do you see a mechanism of being able to take Alto Health into Australia, into the US? And then kind of secondly is just in terms of AI tech and health tech, kind of where do you think the sort of the big movers are going to be in the next sort of 2-3 years, or maybe the next 18 months? I know those are two very disparate questions, but I think just kind of thinking about where you're taking Alto, and does that align to kind of where the industry as a whole is going? I think if you kind of join them.
Yeah. So I think where we would like to take Alto is we have invested in this regulatory process, and we have achieved CE marking through the MHRA in the north. So we will sort of first Ireland, the UK, Europe, but then actually what we will do is rely on the accreditation and the QMS that we've built now, and that Commonwealth relationship. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. There are ways to utilize the regulation processes that we've been through, and make the most of them in those markets. I don't say no to America, but that's a whole other regulatory process, like the FDA, and there are costs associated with that. The market is really fragmented, so there are market and regulatory processes and system processes. The US is driven by a payer system that is fundamentally different to our system. So I think there are a number of factors there, but I think, using regulation as a foundation to think about markets as well is something that we'll do. What the big players in the next 18 months, look, there are certainly some that are coming out of the US. Having said that, they haven't moved into the EU yet. Because their system is so different, we are seeing big players like Alto Health coming from Australia into the UK. And I think one of the things that they've demonstrated that they've done well is the regulation. Again, they are also Class 1 medical device. And I don't know if you saw, gosh, it must have been a few months ago, the NHS in England came out overnight saying all medical scribes needed to be registered. And so before that, they had like 200 medical scribes, and then overnight they had 6. So Heidi has been positioned to really leverage that regulation to take advantage of that market moment. And so what I would say is, in the next 18 months, I think you're going to see AI in health embedded in lots of ways, but lots of products are not going to want to register as a medical device. That is a whole different regulatory system than EHRs and those sort of traditional document holding or moving systems are. So in order for them to avail of that, they have to start their design process from scratch. MDR is baked into every element of design, testing, deployment. So I think we're going to see some really interesting things with AI first products that have built that sort of software as a medical device in from the outset. Yeah.
I really love that. I think that is a really positive note to finish on. So, yeah, thank you, Marita. I appreciate your time. And to our audience, thank you for joining. If you found the conversation interesting and valuable, please share it with someone that you feel would benefit from its message. If you would like to reach me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I welcome any conversation around AI governance, anything along those lines. And in closing, Marita, how can the audience contact you if they'd like to discuss this topic or anything else around software as a medical device? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me through the website, which is altohealth.io, or just directly with me, Marita at altohealth.io. I'd love to hear from people.
Amazing, amazing. And on that note, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.